Hey everyone, please support what I do to help keep Greyhawk alive by subscribing to the channel. Also, please consider becoming a channel member to get early access to videos, exclusive live chats, quarterly adventure modules, and more. Thanks, and enjoy the show. So I was thinking about, the old style of play versus the newer, and I thought it would be fun to talk about Henchmen today on Greyhawk Grognard. So Henchmen are one of those things that really were a feature of the old style of play, especially in the 70s, and as opposed to how things are played today, where generally you have one character and that's about it, and there's some NPCs that the DM controls. But back in the day, and I should say that this was something that was done in the 70s in the original campaigns where you have the big mega dungeons and so forth. And it even when people were playing first edition AD&D, the practice of using henchmen kind of waned as the 80s progressed. So it was something that you read about in the player's handbook and the DM's guide, and you didn't really pay much attention to by the time I was in, say, college. But in that early time, we played with henchmen when I was a kid, and it really does change the way you look at the game. So first of all, definitions. What is a henchman? A henchman is a player character that's kind of shared between the DM and the player. Usually they start out at first level, although there can be exceptions if you capture or charm somebody in a dungeon, for example. And then there's rules for, if you offer them henchman status, will they accept? But basically, it is an associate character, somebody who's a few levels or more than a few levels below that of your main character. For the most part, you control the actions of that henchman. Although there are circumstances in which the henchman can fail a loyalty check, and will refuse to do something that's really dangerous or whatever, and that's where the idea that it's a shared character between the PC and the DM. Now there are some cases where a henchman would actually be played as a full player character. By the player, and this happens. Once you have a henchman who's 7th, 8th level, and is able to go on adventures of their own, then it becomes very possible to do that. Even though it's funny because we know that this happened back in Gary's original campaign, but we also see that in the rules in the player's handbook, it specifically says that you can't do that or shouldn't do that. So there's kind of that dichotomy there. But it did happen that it basically turns your character. Once you have a high enough character who has a bunch of henchmen, you have this stable of characters that you can use, and this is something that I think could be returned to more modern games like 5e or Pathfinder or whatever without a hitch. I mean, you could use the loyalty rules in the old first edition DM's guide and they would work fine, along with the most of the rules about how to hire one and so forth like that. You'd have to adjust it for the new races and classes and all that good stuff. But the idea that you have your main character, but you can also have a bunch of these associate characters, and if they are developed enough during play, they can eventually transition from being henchmen into being full-fledged player characters. And some of the most famous characters we have in the game started off as henchmen. I took the liberty of making a quick list here. Rigby was originally a henchman of Mordenkainen. Bigby, obviously Bigby's hand spells, was originally a henchman. Otto of Otto's Irresistible Dance first started off as a henchman of Tenzor, and then flipped and went over to Robilar for a variety of reasons that were actually explained once. Apparently, Otto didn't like the fact that Tenzor had originally charmed him, and they found him in a dungeon and he was charmed and then became a henchman, and he resented that, so he went over to Robilar. And then Surgeon was also a henchman of Tenzor. So we have this, there's a big history in the origins of the game that you wouldn't just have the one character. And I think that makes a difference psychologically is how you approach a dungeon. Because if you have just the one character and you're going through the dungeon, you're 5th, 8th level, so and you're in the sweet spot, and something happens and your character dies, then all you can do is just sit at the table going like this, waiting for somebody to find a resurrection scroll. If, on the other hand, you have henchmen, that opens up a whole different realm where if your primary character dies, it's a bad thing, absolutely, and you definitely want to recover the body and bring it back to a cleric, but you have many more options if you've got 2 or 3 henchmen there, and this is and if you do play with the henchman rule and you have a party that has not only say 4 or 5 main characters, but each one of them has 2 or 3 henchmen, then you've got a very large, robust party that can take on more threats and do more things in the dungeon, especially if you use them to farm out character classes that might not be as popular among your players. Let's say nobody wants to be the cleric. Then it's simple. You hire a henchman who's going to be your cleric. There are several of those that I mentioned were clerics. So you have this option there that opens up a number of different possibilities when you're in the dungeon. And also, it also makes it less catastrophic for you as a player if your character is killed or incapacitated, because it's not your only character. You have these other henchmen. And that's the kind of circumstance, if I was a DM, I would say, well, yeah, just take one of your henchmen and, that's your character right now. And if you try to do something suicidal, we'll deal with it. There's obviously a level of trust in there between the DM and the player that you're not going to do something stupid just because you're now using a henchman as your primary character. And again, like happened with Big B and Otto and so forth, you have these characters that if they're developed enough in play, if they have their own personalities and, they have their own histories, they have, their own interests and so forth, then they can graduate from henchman status into being actual player characters, and then they would have their own henchmen themselves. So I think this is something that should and could be revived, especially in a campaign where you do have like the mega dungeon as the tentpole. Having that option there, I think really works. Also, in let's say you're a cavalier, and you have your apprentices, not apprentices, your squires. Those would be the kind of thing that you would have as a that you could operate and play as a henchman. Now, it's also important to make the distinction between henchmen and hirelings. Hirelings are specialists or mercenaries that are hired for. They don't rise to the level of a henchman. They're just kind of around as cannon fodder or as specialists, like if you need an alchemist to do something, or if you need a blacksmith to make some armor or whatever, or an armorer to make some armor, or weaponsmith or whatever. Let's say you have a castle or something. But that's not the kind of character that you're going to take into a dungeon. There are mercenaries, lots of different types of mercenaries that are listed as hirelings, and they're also not the kind of character that would tend to get developed all that much. They're the spear guy who goes in front of the party in a dungeon or in the wilderness or whatever. So you're not going to have that kind of level of role playing and investment that you would in a henchman. But I would really, especially for those players who've never played really in the old styles, think about the idea of allowing one of your player characters to have one or two lower level apprentices and henchmen that they could then use, and kind of nurture through the dungeon process, so they'll go up in levels as well. Not usually as quickly as a regular PC, because unless the henchman is at the forefront, which is in combat and so forth, which is unlikely because he's going to be much lower level than the main character. But he's still going to go up in level. And once that happens, you open up all these different possibilities. So I would definitely love to see a revival of the henchman idea and see how it plays, especially in these more modern games. And in my own campaign, once I restart it, I'm definitely going to be encouraging it. I might even make it make it plain that unless you do have henchmen and that extra firepower that comes with them, that you might be in trouble in some places in the campaign. So, anyway, tell me, what do you think? What have you ever used henchmen? Do you have you had that experience of having kind of a coterie of characters when you're going into a dungeon? You have, your main character, and then you have a couple of others that you kind of use as alternates. Let me know. Let me know your experiences. I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Hope you're all doing well today, and have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you later. Thanks for watching today's video. Please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Below you'll find links to my Patreon, which helps make these videos possible. You'll also find the web store where you can buy my books, and my blog where you'll find all sorts of free downloads and other articles. Thanks, and have a great day.